If government continues this path of fiscal irresponsibility, they, they will use the printing press and the BCE because much of Ecuador's incomes comes from oil exports. And since the problem with the dollar, this is decreasing in a higher rate. This year, they created a shortfall in the country's budget and put pressure on its bonds. This makes nearly impossible for Ecuador to tap the markets again. Ecuador's government is trying to lower their dependence on oil. Not only oil is a problem, also the non-oil exports have been falling, like bananas, flowers, and shrimps. Ecuador's need to get a real solution or they will enter into a great crisis. In the year 2000, Ecuador dollarized its economy and implemented an accounting system. This system said that deposit of financial institutions would be backed by foreign exchange reserves. This was beneficial until the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, permitted a new law that allowed the central bank to use the foreign reserves to invest in the country however they want. The money that is used to back up the dollarization of the country is now being used for public spendings. This policy is damaging the country in a fiscal situation by growing levels of debt. By 2015, total debt was $32 billion, double the debt 4 years ago that was 60 billion. Korea's solution was to force the country bank to adopt a new electronic currency. They were searching an alternative method to put an end to the dollar in Ecuador. The amount of money circulating the electronic currency would be larger than its backing in the central bank. The money supply increases and creates inflation. This causes the currency to lose its value. This means the end for dollarization in Ecuador would need to adopt a bi-monetary system. People say that Ecuador will enter a crisis. They should finance their spendings by reducing the metallic content of the currency and force people to accept the new devaluated currency.
Based on the information from 2015, the gross domestic product or GDP in Ecuador showed an expansion of 1% over the same in the previous year. The GDP annual growth rate in Ecuador averaged almost 4.48% from 2000 until 2015, reaching an all-time high of 10.20% in the second quarter of 2004 and the record low of minus 2.3% in the fourth quarter. The advances of the past decade on Ecuador are at risk due to the decline in the oil prices since 2014. And because of this, the economy had a big fall. The difficulty in accessing new funding resources and the appreciation of the dollar has been another problem too in the last years in Ecuador. Poverty rate has gone from 22.5% in 2014 to 23.3% in 2015, which reflect an increase in rural poverty from 35.3% to 39.3%. As you can see in the graph, Ecuador's GDP had a big improvement over the last years. If you see 2016, it was in 46.8%, and moving on the years, in 2014 was more than the double of it. The structure of economy in Ecuador. Ecuador has benefited from exceptional revenues in recent years as a result of high oil prices and favorable economic environment. However, after the oil and commodities boom of 2007 and 2008, that accounted for half the GDP share in 2008, the global economic crisis and falling oil prices cut down the contribution to less than 30% of the GDP in 2009. With the oil prices rising slowly but steadily, revenues are expected to increase slightly in the next years. This trend will push the non-financial public sectors into a deficit of 1.7% in the moving years. However, the risk of oil prices further declining could widen the fiscal deficit and make the government more reliant on other sources of financing, such as bilateral and multilateral loans and foreign reserves. The fiscal pressure dominated much of 2009 and will continue in the next years. Fiscal deficits are expected to average 7% of the GDP every year for the next 5 years. The pressure may force the Ecuadorian government to abandon dollarization and substitute the US dollar with a weaker domestic currency. The advantages of adopting such a fiscal policy are to increase export competitiveness and to take pressure off the balance of payments. Also, it will give a short-term boost to local currency revenues while increasing domestic spending. On the other hand, a weaker currency may potentially increase the rate of inflation in Ecuador. The biggest sector of Ecuador's economy is services, that include hotels and restaurants, transportation, communication, and wholesale trade. The service sector also is responsible for half of Ecuador's GDP and 45% of its labor force. And the other major economic force in the service industry is the informal work sector, which gives many people a means of income when formal employment is in short supply. One of the most important things in Ecuador right now, the unemployment. Believe it or not, more than 1,264,000 families enjoy Social Security and other achievements because in the past the salary was $140, for example in 2007. Today it is in $340, more than the double of the last years. It's great because the people is living well right now in Ecuador. Ecuador also has the lowest urban unemployment rate in Latin America, which stands at 4.9%. As we can see in the graph, it shows us the last 3 years of Ecuador in unemployment. 2013 was a great one, since having a low unemployment rate, but in half 2014 it grew up to 5.7%. The best time they got was from July 2014 until July 2015, when they recorded a 4.5%. This is, in fact, very good because the working is very active in Ecuador. It comes and goes a little bit, but there's still jobs that the people can take. As we can see in the graph, government spending in Ecuador has risen since 2013. This year, the spending is in $2.48 million. This is going to change now because of the recent events that happened in Ecuador, the earthquake. President Rafael Correa announced Wednesday night that he is raising sales taxes and will charge a one-time levy on millionaires to rebuild cities devastated by Ecuador's worst earthquake in decades. People with more than 1 million in assets will be charged a one-time tax of 0.9% on their wealth, while workers earning over $1,000 a month will be forced to contribute a day's wages, and those earning $5,000 a month, the equivalent of 5 days' pay. Now that this event passed, it's going to be a difficult process for Ecuador to stand up, and more for the poor ones that lost everything they had. We hope this situation changes to the best possible way in the future.
In Ecuador, the public debt was $34.128 million has increased 2,658 million since 2014. This amount means that the debt in 2015 reached 34% of Ecuador's GDP, a 3.35% point rise from 2014 when it was 31% of GDP. If we see the evolution of Ecuador debt, it has risen since 2005 in the global debt terms. First, it was 14 million dollars, although it has fallen to a percentage of GDP when it amounted to 35%. According to the latest data point published, Ecuador per capita debt was $2,000 per inhabitant. In 2014, it was $1,500, rising by $400. The position of Ecuador compared to the rest of the world has worsened a lot in 2015 in terms of GDP percentage. All of this debt is merely because Ecuador government is relying on China's oil exports. Ecuador's government signed a loan for $2 billion with the China Development Bank Corp. Currently, China's loans to Ecuador exceed $6 billion, including $5.7 billion to finance 80% of the Cocoa Color Sinclair, a hydropower plant to be built by China's Sino-Hydro Corp in Ecuador. These supply about 75% of the country's energy needs. Since 2008, with the government foreign debt was $7 billion, it has surged 54% to $10.7 billion with the latest deal that they did with China. El Universo, a newspaper, reported that the loan from China's development bank is tied to another 72 million barrels per day of oil deliveries, citing a memo from the negotiations. That would make Ecuador owe 75% of its oil export to China. Ecuadorian bankers reported that Ecuador was a 10 billion credit line from China. If this happens, Ecuador would owe China an extraordinary 24% of the GDP. With the latest deal, Ecuador owes China like $8 billion, or as we can say that 19% of the GDP. That's more than its total external debt. Ecuador cannot keep relying on China's oil anymore because the debt would increase in a big rate, and it would become a crisis for Ecuador.
So, to conclude, we hope that Ecuador's economy stabilizes back after this earthquake and that their economy continues to go well, because it is really difficult to recover from a situation like this. So, for all the people of Ecuador and the world, may God be with you. Hope you like the video.